March 1944. A farmhouse in rural Normandy. A French resistance fighter sits at a kitchen table, a tin of Huntley and Palmer's biscuits open before him. German patrols pass outside every 2 hours. Discovery means execution. But the tin isn't filled with biscuits. It's filled with a radio transmitter, so ingeniously disguised that German soldiers have searched this farmhouse twice, examined this exact tin, even shaken it to hear contents rattle, and walked away satisfied it contained nothing but British cookies. The fighter adjusts a wire antenna stretched along ceiling rafters, disguised as a clothesline. He taps Morse code on a key hidden inside the biscuit tin. The message transmits in burst mode. 3 seconds of high-speed transmission, almost impossible to detect with German direction-finding equipment. The message contains coordinates for weapons drop, bridge sabotage plans, intelligence on German troop movements. London receives it 400 miles away. The response comes 2 minutes later. Weapons drop confirmed for tomorrow night, 0200 hours. The transmission ends. He closes the tin, returns it to the kitchen shelf between actual food supplies. If German soldiers burst through the door right now, they'd find a biscuit tin that looks, feels, weighs, and sounds exactly like a commercial product. They'd never suspect it contains a complete radio transceiver capable of communicating with England. They'd confiscate food, maybe rough up occupants, but leave the radio sitting on the shelf. This isn't just clever camouflage. This is engineering genius. A fully functional radio transmitter and receiver packed into space measuring 20 by 15 by 8 centimeters. A device drawing so little power it runs on batteries small enough to hide in the same tin. A transmitter broadcasting on frequencies German detection equipment struggles to monitor, using burst transmission modes, making direction finding nearly impossible. And all disguised as something so mundane that enemy forces examined thousands throughout occupied Europe and never realized they were holding the resistance communication backbone. How did Britain pack an entire radio station into a biscuit tin? How did a device disguised as British snacks coordinate attacks that crippled German supply lines and paved the way for D-Day? By 1941, Britain faced catastrophic communication problems. Special operations executive agents and resistance networks across occupied Europe gathered vital intelligence and conducted sabotage, but coordination was nearly impossible. Without reliable communication with London, agents operated blindly. They couldn't receive orders, request supplies, report intelligence, or coordinate timing for multi-location attacks. The resistance was fragmented into isolated cells, unable to work together effectively. Radio communication was the obvious solution, but radios in 1941 were enormous. Military field radios weighed 20 kilograms, requiring 2 people to carry. Civilian radios were furniture-sized. Even the smallest portable radios measured 30 by 40 centimeters and weighed 8 kilograms. An agent carrying such equipment was instantly identifiable. German soldiers searched for radios obsessively because they knew radio communication was the key to resistance coordination. The Gestapo was ruthless about hunting radio operators. They deployed direction-finding vans triangulating transmissions within minutes. They monitored frequencies continuously. They instituted policies requiring civilians to register all radio ownership, making unauthorized possession a capital crime. In France alone, over 2,000 people were executed for illegal radio operation between 1941 and 1944. The Germans understood cutting resistance communications would cripple their effectiveness, and they were succeeding. SOE's technical section received an impossible mandate: develop radios small enough to hide during searches, powerful enough to reach England from anywhere in Europe, simple enough that agents with minimal training could operate them under stress. The radios had to be concealable not just during transport, but during operation. Agents needed to transmit without creating obvious signs alerting German patrols or direction-finding teams. The breakthrough came from understanding radios didn't need to look like radios. German soldiers searched for equipment looking military or technical, metal boxes with dials, antennas, wiring. But what if a radio looked like something completely innocent? What if it was disguised so perfectly that soldiers would examine it, dismiss it as harmless civilian goods, and move on? The answer was the Biscuit tin radio. Engineers packed a complete transceiver into a metal tin designed to hold British biscuits, a common item found throughout Europe even during wartime. The tin looked authentic down to printed labels, slightly dented corners, the way the lid fit. Open it and you'd see a layer of actual biscuits on top. Only if you removed biscuits and lifted a false bottom would you discover the radio hidden beneath. And even then, components were arranged to look like jumbled spare parts rather than functional devices, providing one more layer of plausible deniability. By late 1942, Biscuit tin radios were being parachuted into France, Belgium, Holland, Norway, and Poland. They became the communication backbone for hundreds of resistance cells. These tiny transmitters coordinated sabotage campaigns preceding D-Day, called in supply drops arming thousands of fighters, and transmitted intelligence shaping Allied strategy. The Germans knew resistance radio communications were happening. They intercepted transmissions constantly. But they could never find the source because they were searching for radios and finding biscuit tins instead. The engineering challenge was brutal. A functional radio requires transmitter, receiver, antenna, power supply, and controls. In 1941, even the most compact military radios required briefcase-sized packages weighing 5 kilograms. SOE needed something fitting inside a biscuit tin, measuring 20 by 15 by 8 centimeters, weighing less than 2 kilograms fully loaded. The breakthrough came from miniaturizing vacuum tube technology. Standard radio tubes were finger-sized components generating significant heat, requiring substantial power. British engineers developed sub-miniature tubes, or acorn tubes, measuring just 15 millimeters tall. These tiny tubes functioned identically to full-sized versions, but consumed 1/10 the power and generated far less heat. Reduced power consumption was critical because smaller batteries could run the radio for useful periods. The transmitter circuit was designed around a single tube functioning as both oscillator and amplifier, a clever arrangement reducing component count dramatically. The transmitter operated on frequencies between 3 and 8 megahertz, a range providing good long-distance propagation while being difficult for German directing finding equipment to track accurately. Transmission power was deliberately low, just 5 watts, because higher power would require larger components, bigger batteries, and create stronger signals easier to detect. 5 watts doesn't sound like much. A modern light bulb uses more power. But with efficient antenna design and favorable atmospheric conditions, 5 watts could reach England from anywhere in Western Europe. The key was transmission efficiency. Engineers optimized every component to extract maximum range from minimum power. The receiver was even more miniaturized. It used a regenerative circuit, an old design that was incredibly efficient but required careful tuning. A single tube served multiple functions through clever feedback arrangements, amplifying weak signals repeatedly. This made the receiver sensitive enough to hear London's responses despite minimal power. The downside was regenerative receivers could oscillate if mistuned, potentially creating detectable emissions. Operators required training to tune properly. The power supply was the most impressive innovation. Traditional radios required large batteries because vacuum tubes were power-hungry. The biscuit tin radio used custom-manufactured batteries designed specifically for low-power tube operation. Batteries fit into the tin bottom beneath the radio components and provided 90 volts for tube operation plus 1.5 volts for filaments. A complete battery set weighed just 300 grams and could power 30 minutes of transmission time or several hours of listening, enough for typical agent operations. The batteries were disguised too. They were enclosed in cardboard wrapping printed to look like condensed milk tins or tobacco packets. If someone discovered batteries, they'd see product packaging, not obvious electrical components. This layered deception was typical of Biscuit tin radio design. Everything had at least 2 levels of camouflage. The antenna was a separate challenge. Radios need antennas proportional to wavelength. At 5 MHz, an optimal antenna would be 15 meters long, obviously impossible to hide. The solution was using whatever was available as antenna: bed springs, metal gutters, wire clotheslines. The radio included an antenna tuning unit that could match the transmitter to almost any length and type of wire, making it functional even with improvised antennas. Agents were trained to use household items as antennas without creating obvious installations alerting German searches. The Biscuit tin itself was authentic, actual Huntley and Palmer's tins procured from the manufacturer. The tins were chosen because they were common throughout Europe even during wartime. British biscuits were luxury items people hoarded and reused for storage. A biscuit tin on a shelf raised no suspicion. The tin also provided electromagnetic shielding, preventing radio frequency leakage detectable by German monitoring equipment when the radio was idle. Inside the tin, component arrangement was critical. The radio occupied the bottom half, a false floor sat above it, and actual biscuits filled space above the false floor. If someone opened the tin casually, they'd see biscuits. Only if they removed all biscuits and examined the tin closely would they notice the false bottom, and even then it was secured with clips looking like reinforcement structures rather than fasteners. Removing the false bottom revealed the radio, but components were intentionally arranged in non-obvious layout that could be explained as spare parts or broken equipment if discovered. The Morse key was separate but disguised. It was built into an ordinary fountain pen. Squeeze the pen's body and it functioned as a telegraph key. An agent could carry the pen openly, use it for writing, and only when connected to the radio by thin wire would its true function become apparent. Alternative key designs included one built into a cigarette lighter and another hidden inside a flashlight. Operating the radio required practice but wasn't overly complex. The agent would set up the antenna, usually draping wire along existing structures like clotheslines or picture rails, connect antenna to radio via small plug, connect Morse key, turn on radio by inserting battery pack, wait 30 seconds for tubes to warm up, tune to prearranged frequency using a small dial, begin transmitting. The entire setup could be accomplished in under 2 minutes with practice. Transmission protocols were designed for security. Agents used predetermined schedules, sked times, when London would be listening for their signals. This eliminated need for lengthy transmissions while trying to establish contact. Messages were pre-encoded using one-time pads, compressed to minimum length, and sent in Morse code at high speed, typically 25 words per minute or faster. A typical message might contain 50 code groups and take just 2 minutes to transmit. This short transmission time made direction finding nearly impossible. By the time German monitors triangulated the signal, transmission would be over and antenna would be down. By 1943, improved versions appeared. The B2 model included a built-in wire recorder, a magnetic recording device capturing London's transmissions for later playback, eliminating need for agents to copy Morse code manually during reception. The Mark 7 featured even smaller tubes and extended battery life to 45 minutes of transmission, but the basic biscuit tin remained standard because its disguise was so perfect. Production was handled by small workshops across England. Each radio took approximately 40 hours to build and required hand tuning by experienced technicians. Monthly production reached about 60 units by late 1942, not enough to meet demand, but sufficient to equip critical resistance networks. The radios cost approximately £150 each to manufacture, expensive but far cheaper than losing agents due to communication failures. German intelligence never fully understood what they were facing. They captured biscuit tin radios occasionally, betrayed agents, compromised safe houses, but they assumed each one was a custom improvisation rather than standardized British equipment. Their technical analysis reports describe crudely assembled transmitters disguised in food containers without recognizing the sophisticated engineering behind the apparent crudeness. That misunderstanding kept them searching for professional-looking equipment while dismissing the actual radios as amateur devices not worth thorough investigation. Little did the Germans know, their dismissal of crude radios was exactly the response British engineers had designed for. The Biscuit tin radio's first major test came in occupied France during late 1942. SOE agent Francis Cammertz established a network codenamed Jockey in southeastern France. His primary tool was a biscuit tin radio he moved between safe houses every few days. Over 18 months, Cammertz coordinated 52 sabotage operations using that single radio: railway demolitions, bridge destructions, factory sabotage, German convoy ambushes. Each operation was timed through radio coordination with London and other resistance cells. The radio's portability was crucial. Cammertz could carry it in a small bag, moving quickly when German direction-finding vans appeared. The Gestapo knew someone was transmitting. They picked up signals repeatedly, but by the time they triangulated a location, Cammertz would have finished transmitting and moved the radio to a different safe house kilometers away. Over 18 months of operation, German forces came close to capturing him 7 times. They never found the radio because they were searching for suitcase-sized equipment and overlooking biscuit tins. In Belgium, a resistance network called Comet used 3 biscuit tin radios to coordinate an escape line guiding downed Allied airmen to neutral Spain. The radios allowed the network to communicate flight crew locations, coordinate safe house transfers, and request urgent supplies. Between 1942 and 1944, the Comet line evacuated over 800 Allied airmen. Each evacuation coordinated through radio messages transmitted from biscuit tins sitting on kitchen shelves while German soldiers patrolled streets outside. The radios enabled precise timing for coordinated attacks. In May 1944, as D-Day approached, SOE coordinated simultaneous railway sabotage across France. On a single night, resistance cells hit 950 separate rail targets, cutting tracks, destroying switches, demolishing bridges. The attacks were timed through radio messages sent days earlier to dozens of cells, each using biscuit tin radios to receive instructions. The coordinated destruction delayed German reinforcements moving toward Normandy by crucial days, contributing significantly to invasion success. The psychological impact on German forces was severe. They knew resistance radio communications were happening constantly. They monitored frequencies, deployed direction-finding units, offered rewards for information about illegal radio operators, but they couldn't stop transmissions because they couldn't find equipment. German soldiers searched tens of thousands of homes, examined millions of items, confiscated anything remotely suspicious. But biscuit tins were so common, so innocuous, that they rarely warranted more than a casual glance. One remarkable incident occurred in Holland during 1943. A German patrol searched a farmhouse where a resistance radio operator was transmitting at that exact moment. The operator heard soldiers approaching, closed the biscuit tin, and placed it on the kitchen table among other food supplies. The Germans searched the house thoroughly, examining luggage, furniture, even floorboards. An officer noticed the biscuit tin, picked it up, shook it, heard biscuits rattle inside, and set it back down. He walked out without realizing the still warm radio inside had been transmitting 30 seconds before he entered. The operator resumed transmission 10 minutes after the patrol left. Not every operation succeeded. German intelligence did capture radio operators occasionally. In 1943, betrayal led to arrest of an entire resistance cell in Lyon. German forces found their biscuit tin radio and analyzed it carefully. Their technical report acknowledged the sophistication, but concluded it was a one-off assembly by a skilled technician, not evidence of mass production. This failure to recognize standardized equipment kept Germans searching for the wrong things. The radios facilitated intelligence that shaped the war. A resistance operator in Brittany used a biscuit tin radio to report German submarine movements from coastal bases. His messages allowed the Royal Navy to coordinate anti-submarine patrols that sank 17 U-boats over 6 months. In Poland, a resistance operator transmitted information about German rocket tests at Blizna, intelligence revealing the V-2 rocket program's status and helping Britain develop countermeasures. Supply coordination was another critical function. Resistance forces needed weapons, explosives, medical supplies, and ammunition. The Biscuit tin radios allowed them to request specific items and receive drop coordinates in return. On a typical night, a dozen different radios across France might transmit supply requests, and London would coordinate drops to all simultaneously. The efficiency transformed the resistance from poorly equipped guerrillas into a force capable of sustained operations. By D-Day, over 200 Biscuit tin radios were operating across occupied Europe. They coordinated railway sabotage that crippled German logistics. They directed resistance forces to attack specific targets at specific times to support invasion. They transmitted bomb damage assessments after Allied air raids. They guided supply drops that armed thousands of fighters. And they did it all while remaining invisible to an enemy actively searching for them. What if I told you that biscuit tins sitting on kitchen shelves coordinated the sabotage campaign that helped win D-Day while German soldiers searched for radios they'd never recognize? The biscuit tin radio transformed resistance effectiveness. Before their introduction, resistance cells operated independently with minimal coordination. Success rates for sabotage were approximately 40%. Many operations failed due to poor timing, inadequate resources, or lack of intelligence about German responses. After biscuit tin radios enabled coordination, success rates jumped to 75%. The difference was communication, the ability to verify target information with London, coordinate timing with other cells, and request necessary supplies. The radios had strategic impact beyond individual operations. German forces in occupied territories had to divert resources to counterintelligence and radio hunting. Direction-finding vans patrolled cities continuously. German soldiers conducted random searches looking for radio equipment. Collaborators were recruited to report suspicious radio activity. These efforts consumed thousands of German troops and intelligence personnel who could have been deployed elsewhere. The biscuit tin radios created a resource drain that weakened German occupation forces across all of Europe. But limitations were real. Low transmission power meant communications weren't always reliable. Atmospheric conditions affected signal propagation dramatically. On nights with poor conditions, agents might transmit for scheduled periods without London receiving signals. Messages had to be sent multiple times on different nights to ensure reception. This uncertainty created stress and risk. Every transmission increased chance of German direction-finding success. The radios were fragile despite robust construction. Vacuum tubes could break if dropped or roughly handled. Antenna tuning components were sensitive to moisture and temperature extremes. Several radios failed in field due to component failures, leaving agents without communication until replacement radios could be dropped. Average operational lifespan was approximately 6 months before technical problems required radio replacement. Battery life was a constant constraint. 30 minutes of transmission time sounds generous, but encoding messages, tuning radio, and handling interrupted transmissions consumed time quickly. Agents often found themselves rationing transmissions, prioritizing only the most critical messages. Battery replacement required supply drops or courier deliveries, creating logistical challenges. The radios required skilled operators. Morse code proficiency took weeks to develop. Operating under stress while monitoring for German patrols required psychological resilience not everyone possessed. Some agents froze during transmissions, made errors, or took too long and exposed themselves to direction finding. Training was extensive, but field conditions were far more stressful than training environments. German direction finding improved throughout the war. By 1944, German vans could triangulate transmissions in under 5 minutes in urban areas. This forced agents to transmit more quickly and move locations constantly. Some operators developed techniques like transmitting while walking, carrying radio in a bag with antenna wire trailing, transmitting while moving through city streets to prevent triangulation. These desperate measures worked sometimes, but increased risk of discovery through suspicious behavior. Despite limitations, the biscuit tin radio's impact was immense. Post-war analysis concluded that coordinated resistance sabotage delayed German reinforcements to Normandy by an average of 2 days per division. Delays critical during invasion's vulnerable early stages. Railway disruptions caused by radio-coordinated sabotage reduced German logistics capacity by approximately 30% in France during June 1944. These effects were possible only because Biscuit tin radios allowed coordination at scale. The radios also provided intelligence shaping Allied bombing strategy. Resistance operators transmitted factory production information, railway traffic patterns, troop concentration reports. This ground-level intelligence complemented aerial reconnaissance and helped planners identify the most valuable targets. The psychological value to resistance fighters was incalculable. The radios provided connection to London, proof they weren't forgotten, that their actions mattered, that support would come. Morale in resistance networks with radios was significantly higher than in isolated cells without communication. The ability to request supplies and receive them created tangible evidence of Allied commitment. The Biscuit tin radio never fired a bullet, never exploded, never destroyed anything directly. But it killed German operational effectiveness by making the resistance coordinated instead of fragmented. Every railway line sabotaged through radio-coordinated timing was logistics disrupted. Every supply drop called in by Biscuit tin transmission was arms for fighters. Every intelligence message transmitted from a kitchen shelf was information shaping Allied strategy. The Biscuit tin radio reminds us that World War II's deadliest weapons often looked like nothing at all. A cookie container sitting on a shelf, components appearing crude to German analysts, equipment so ordinary that soldiers examined it and walked away. But inside that mundane packaging was the communication backbone turning isolated fighters into an army. The agents who operated these radios understood they were the link between underground resistance and Allied command. Every Morse code message they tapped out connected occupied Europe to free England. Every transmission risked their lives, German direction-finding vans hunting for signals, Gestapo forces ready to torture radio operators to death. But they transmitted anyway, because the Biscuit tin radio was their voice, their lifeline, their weapon. So remember the engineers who packed a radio station into a cookie container. Remember the operators who transmitted with German patrols outside, trusting their lives to disguised equipment. Remember the biscuit tin that sat on thousands of shelves across occupied Europe, hiding communications that coordinated liberation. That's the genius of British World War II innovation. That's the weapon built from perfect disguise that let underground armies speak. From spike letterboxes collecting intelligence, to bicycle chargers transmitting transmissions, to shoe compartments smuggling messages, World War II weapons reveals how British intelligence turned innocence into lethality. Subscribe now for more incredible stories of weapons that killed through perfect disguise and brilliant deception.